Muy buenos días a todos, bienvenidos a nuestra octava sesión de Generación Consciente. Supongo que están tan sorprendidos como yo al comprobar que cuando se aprende tanto, cuando se adquieren conocimientos tan valiosos, el tiempo pasa realmente muy rápido. Hoy, después de un par de meses y de 7 sesiones, casi hemos llegado al final de esta etapa de Generación Consciente. El programa de inspiración para la acción en el que ustedes, los empresarios y los líderes de grandes organizaciones en Guatemala, El Salvador, Panamá y Colombia han adquirido las herramientas y las perspectivas nuevas acerca de su propia labor para transformar lo que esta sociedad necesita, para cambiar ese liderazgo y para tener una voluntad de mejorar el mundo en el que estamos. En el Grupo Bancolombia estamos convencidos de que este es un paso en la dirección correcta y creemos que a partir de estas conversaciones, de estas lecciones y de los compromisos con nosotros mismos que surgirán de acá en adelante, tendremos los elementos para ver el futuro con optimismo. Dije al principio que hemos llegado casi al final de esta etapa porque seguiremos después de esta sesión, de nuestra octava sesión, en la construcción del legado que muchos de ustedes dejarán en sus empresas. Esta declaración de principios y de propósitos que servirá como una especie de carta de navegación en el futuro, ojalá muy próximo, muy inmediato. Para ese legado debo recordarles una vez más, esto es muy importante, responder las preguntas que les ha enviado Rash. Esas respuestas que ustedes deben mandar al mismo correo del cual les llegaron constituyen el insumo principal para el equipo de producción de Generación Consciente. Cuando ustedes las envíen, se estarán comunicando con las personas que han contestado para afinar cada uno de los detalles. Una vez definidos, les responderán por escrito junto a las recomendaciones que deben seguir para grabar su manifiesto. Entremos en materia. Hemos convertido en una costumbre tener en Generación Consciente invitados muy especiales. Y esta octava sesión sigue, por supuesto, esa tradición, crear una relación saludable con el dinero que recibimos, que reciben las empresas, es una de las ideas fundamentales que nuestra invitada de hoy ha compartido con más de 100,000 personas en muchos países a los que ha asistido como speaker o como coach en recaudación de fondos con integridad y filantropía consciente. Pero para presentarla formalmente, quiero saludar primero al líder académico de Generación Consciente y coautor del bestseller Conscious Capitalism, él es Rash Sisodia. Rash, good morning, how is Boston? And please tell us who Lynne Twist is. Hello, how are you?
Yes, good morning, Jorge, and good morning to everybody. It is the end of our journey, or the first phase of our journey, and it's been wonderful being with all of you. And really, I could not think of a better person to join us for this grand finale of this experience than Lynne Twist. She's a dear friend. She's a fellow board member of Conscious Capitalism, Inc., and she really has been a life-changing teacher for me and for hundreds of thousands of people, if not more, around the world. The extraordinary Lynne Twist. For 40 years, Lynne has been working as a global visionary, working to alleviate poverty, to end world hunger, and support dramatic social justice and environmental sustainability initiatives. She was the chief fundraising officer for the Hunger Project. She literally raised hundreds of millions of dollars for that. And then around 1996, she and her husband started the Pachamama Alliance, which I'm sure she'll tell us more about, whose mission is to empower the indigenous people of the Amazon rainforest to not only preserve their culture, but also what we have to learn from those indigenous traditions for the rest of the world so that we can bring about a thriving, just, and sustainable world. Lynne has been featured on Super Soul Sunday with Oprah Winfrey. I mean, she's worked with almost all the world-changing figures of the last few decades, including the Dalai Lama, the president of South Africa and the end of apartheid, F.W. de Klerk, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Buckminster Fuller, Jane Goodall, Maya Angelou, and many others. She worked with Mother Teresa in Calcutta. You know, she's worked in the refugee camps in Ethiopia, and just an extraordinary human being. She's been featured in many films, and she also wrote a wonderful book called The Soul of Money, which has been translated into 9 languages. So it's really my great pleasure and privilege really here to welcome Lynne to share your wisdom and your inspiration with us. And how can we use business to uplift humanity, and how can we create a better world for all. And for the participants, I'd ask you, if you have any questions that come to your mind as you listen to Lynne, please put them in the chat, because we'll have a little bit of time later on for Lynne to answer some of those questions. So welcome, Lynne, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Raj, and thank you, Jorge, and thank you all of you in the Bancolombia for including me in this incredible gathering. I'm very, very, very honored to spend this time with you, and a little bit intimidated by the power that all of you hold in the continent of South America, the work you do, the program you've been in. It's been such an honor to know Raj and to be part of Conscious Capitalism, and just really thrilled to know that you've been together with Raj and Neha, learning about the deep work of Conscious Capitalism. I call myself a pro-activist, an activist for, not against. I'm really committed to staying in touch with the vision that we all hold for the world, to work for everyone with no one and nothing left out. And as a pro-activist, I stand for that vision, even though I know there's a lot of obstacles to that vision, a lot of things that are in the way, but I'm not against anything. I'm looking at how we can naturally hospice the natural death of those structures and systems that no longer serve us, that are out of date, that are inappropriate, that are no longer useful, knowing that they made their contribution, those structures and systems, but now it's time to hospice the birth of the new structures and systems that will give us the world that we want. And given that business is the largest and most powerful institution on this planet, really now more powerful than governments, certainly more stable than governments, I think you all know, or you wouldn't be in this program, that business has a critical leadership role to play in generating the world we want. And I've been, first of all, thank you for allowing me to speak in English. I am embarrassed that I don't speak Spanish. I have been working in South America with the Pachamama Alliance in Ecuador and Peru for the last 25 years, primarily with indigenous people. The indigenous people who inhabit the Amazon and the Andes. And so I'm very grateful to all of you that you do speak English or are able to translate what I'm saying, and want to thank you for that generosity. But back to business and the role that you're playing, I know already, and continue to play. One of the things that's been very powerful for me is my work with indigenous people. And I imagine that some of you, maybe many of you, have access to indigenous wisdom, the incredible traditions that indigenous people seem to find a way to maintain no matter how marginalized they are. And one of the things that I thought it would be useful to share, which some of you may know anyway, but it's a time of rethinking or revisiting this, is the prophecy that comes out of the Amazon and the Andes about this time in history. It's called the prophecy of the eagle and the condor, and it's been told for millennia, as many of you may know, by the indigenous people in an oral tradition that's been passed down for thousands of years about exactly this time in history. And this prophecy for me makes sense of the kind of crazy world we're in right now. And the prophecy talks about the eagle people and the condor people. And the prophecy refers to the eagle people as people like us, people who perceive life in the modern world primarily through the mind, the eagle people. And the prophecy says that the eagle people, the people who perceive life primarily through the mind, will come to a kind of zenith at this time in history, a kind of excellence in our capacity to use the mind. And that we will have at this time in history, right around the year 2000, the beginning of the third millennium, have tools, have invented tools that extend the capacity of the mind, remarkable technologies. We will have art at its finest. We will have music at its finest. And we will be materially rich, the Eagle people, beyond any previous generation's imagination. Yet, we will be somehow spiritually impoverished to our peril, and our very survival will be at risk as a result. And the prophecy says that right around this time in history, the Condor people, which refers to the indigenous people, who live primarily through the wisdom of the heart, their relationship with the natural world and the spirit world. The prophecy says that they will be at a zenith in their capacity to understand the spiritual world, the natural world, and the wisdom of the heart, that they will be highly sophisticated in those ways, yet they will be materially impoverished to their peril, and their very survival will be at risk. The prophecy says that at this time in history, we're just completing what they call, the indigenous people call, the fifth Pachacuti, a 500-year cycle that began somewhere around 1492, if that date rings a bell for you. And that 500-year cycle, they say, is just completing, and they call that the Pachacuti, the 500-year cycle of dominance and darkness. And they say that we're about to enter the next 500-year cycle, which they call the Pachacuti of balance and light. And they say at this change between the Pachacuti of dominance and darkness to the Pachacuti of balance and light, this is the point when the Eagle people, the people who perceive life primarily through the mind, the modern world people, you might say, will be in the great majority on the planet, and the Condor people, the indigenous people, will be in the minority, but their spiritual power will have pulled them through, so that at this time in history, the Eagle people and the Condor people will remember that they are each other, and the mind and the heart of humanity will rejoin, and we will begin to fly together in the same skies, and the world will come into balance for the Pachacuti of balance and light. And they say that the change between the Pachacuti, the 500-year cycle of dominance and darkness, and the Pachacuti of balance and light, that change, that huge transition will take somewhere between 25 to 50 years. And during that time, they say Pachamama, which is their word for Mother Earth, as you know, will humble all her creatures with volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, floods, fires, huge climactic events that have been prophesied. This has been prophesied for thousands of years, for 25, 30, 35 years. And Pachamama will humble all her creatures so they will find their rightful role in relationship with her for the Pachacuti of balance and light. So the climate change crisis that we are living through now, which I'm sure you're deeply familiar with, no one can miss it, it has been prophesied for millennia about this time, a change, a huge change in the human condition and in the balance in the mind and the heart of humanity. And I love that prophecy because it's hopeful, even though it prophesies that there'll be a lot of suffering during this period, a lot of huge climactic changes that will shatter and shake all of us and create a lot of suffering, that it's a kind of, as they would call, a cleansing, a purification of our way of living. So we go into the next Pachacuti, the next 500 years of balance and light in right relationship with the earth, with our mother, with our heart, with our mind, and with one another. And I would say in many ways, the work you're doing, that you've been doing with Raj and Nehat and all the coaches, is a way of making sense of the world we're living in, so that business, the largest institution on this planet, can play its rightful role in finding balance with the mother, with Pachamama, with the great creator, with the natural world, and can play the leadership role that's yours to play in pulling all of us into this next era, this next time where we reinvent what it means to be in business. We reinvent what it means to be human. When we reinvent a kind of humanity that includes everyone, that marginalizes no one, that leaves no one out, a world that works for everyone, as Buckminster Fuller, one of my greatest teachers, said, a world that works for everyone, with no one and nothing left out. I'm highly aware, and I would imagine you're highly aware, that the pandemic, what we went through in 2020, which is still obviously dominating our consciousness, our businesses, our way of life, was an interruption, a disruption that maybe some of the scientists and health professionals could have predicted, but I think most of us couldn't have predicted it. It didn't even kind of believe it was happening. And that pandemic that extended all the way through 2020, one could say, is the beginning of coming to terms with huge climactic changes, huge transformational changes that are being called on for the human family. There's a friend and a colleague, you may know Paul Hawken, who wrote The Ecology of Commerce, who's worked with business for many years in helping business move from the way it's been working for so long into a mutual enhancing relationship with the natural world. Paul Hawken says, perhaps climate change has not happened to us. It's not something that's happening to us, but happening for us. It's essential feedback for all of us to understand that from 2020 to 2030 is the critical decade for humanity to find its rightful role in relationship with the natural world. Maybe particularly having business find its natural role in relationship with the natural world, or its rightful role in relationship with the natural world. And it's my assertion, and many people's assertion, that the 2020s, from 2020 to 2030, is the critical decade. The decade when the Sustainable Development Goals actually must be met, not just a target, but an imperative. A decade when perhaps it might be the most important decade in human history. And it began with 2020 humbling all of us through the pandemic, having us pause, having us step back, having us have to look at things that we hadn't looked at. Maybe 2020 was a year of revelation, revealing that which we hadn't attended to. In the United States, we had a real comeuppance with Black Lives Matter and our issue with race in my own country in 2020. It was a very harsh revelation for how much work we have to do in racial justice in our society. So you could say that 2020 was a year that gave us a kind of 2020 vision, clearer vision of what we need to attend to in this 10-year period from 2020 to 2030. Perhaps, I would assert, the most critical decade in the history of humanity. And here at the beginning of 2021, we need to come of age in some sort of way to address these issues that the disruption, the pandemic, have made us focus on, see in a way that perhaps we were all denying. I feel that the 2020s are an opportunity to not only face what we haven't faced, but to actually see what do we want to give birth to. It could be For those of you who are women and those of you who are married to women or know women, you know that when a woman is pregnant and she doesn't know it, she has something called morning sickness. It's a kind of warning that the body is changing. And you could say when a woman doesn't know she's pregnant and has morning sickness, she thinks there's something wrong. But when she finds out she's pregnant, then she has a context for morning sickness. She has a context for understanding what's happening to her body. And she's excited and thrilled knowing that she's going to have a baby. And so she can tolerate that uncomfortableness, that nausea in the morning, because she knows it means I'm having a child. In many ways, the pandemic could be a kind of morning sickness for humanity to realize we're pregnant with something new. We are ready to give birth to a new way of living, a new way of being, a new way of seeing one another, a new way of being human, a kind of humanity that's not a you or me humanity. You make it at my expense because there's not enough for all of us or for both of us, or I make it at your expense, but a you and me framework for humanity where we all can make it at no one's expense. It's my assertion and my hope, I'll say my vision, that this pandemic is an announcement of a pregnancy of the human family. And as difficult as the pandemic has been, as much suffering as there's been, as much as the difficulties and the death and the pain we've all gone through, there's something that's being taught to us. The indigenous people call the pandemic not a punishment, but an ally for the human family to find our soul again, to find our way forward, and to become conscious of our actions, knowing that the choices we make impact the future of life for the next 1,000 years, that we're living at that kind of critical time. And that kind of consciousness ennobles our life rather than is a burden to us. It ennobles our life and has us know how important we are, how critical this time is, and that we're lucky enough to be alive at a time when we can have that kind of an impact with our life. There's one more prophecy that I want to share that I think is relevant to our time as well. And this prophecy comes from the Baha'i people, and it's been picked up also in North America by the Cherokee people, and they tell this prophecy as well. And they say this. They say that the bird of humanity has two great wings, a male wing and a female wing. And they say that at this time in history, right around now, the bird of humanity will realize that it's been flying primarily with the male wing, and that the female wing in the bird of humanity has been folded in, not yet fully extended, not yet fully expressed. The female wing, not just women, but the female wing in all of us. So the male wing has become overdeveloped, over-muscular, and in fact has become violent. And the bird of humanity has thus been flying in circles for hundreds of years. And at this time in history, the prophecy says the female wing in all of us, the feminine wing in who we are, will begin to fully express itself, find its full expression in men and women. And the male wing will begin to relax, and the bird of humanity finally, instead of flying in circles, will soar. I love that prophecy also because it's hopeful, because it acknowledges, it doesn't make anything wrong. It acknowledges the power of the patriarchal way that we've been living, but it also gives us permission to express our more feminine side, the expression of the heart, honoring that huge expression and giving it the same power and weight and importance as the masculine in each of us. So those are two prophecies that I think are really hopeful and powerful for our time, and particularly want to acknowledge and celebrate the beginning, this first year, and now 2021, of the 2020s, from 2020 to 2030, I think the pivotal decade. And business has the key role to play in turning the tide, the key role to play in shifting everything that needs to go in a direction that's more friendly to the long-term future of life, to future generations, to the future of all children of all species for all time, and so that the nourishment and natural relationship that we have with one another in the natural world becomes a front and center commitment of not only the business community, but of the human family and the community of life. So those are some things that I want to share, and that the opportunity to hospice the death of the old ways of working, the structures and systems that no longer serve us, while we midwife the birth of those new structures and systems that do. That's really what conscious capitalism is all about, in my view. That's one of the reasons I'm privileged to serve on the board with Raj and our colleagues, and so thrilled to know that you're at work in South America, in Colombia, in Guatemala, in Panama, leading your companies, but also your societies in a direction where we become more conscious, more visionary, more heartful, more all-inclusive, and more true to who we are and the depth of our own humanity. So that's what I want to share. I hope that's useful to you. Probably quite different than what you've been talking about, I don't know. But I'm honored and thrilled to be in communion with people who have the kind of leadership positions, the kind of leadership vision that you have, and the opportunity you have to make the kind of difference you can make with your life, with your company, with your employees, and with this very, very special decade in history.
Thank you so much, Lynne. You are just such an inspirational figure. I mean, there are angels with us, and Lynne is one of those figures that I put as truly a positive, uplifting presence on this planet at this time. So thank you so much. We're privileged to know you and to learn from you and to be walking alongside you. I'm going to ask Jorge to select the questions and lead us through a brief Q&A before we say goodbye to Lynne.
Yes, of course. Hello, Lynne. Good morning. Lynne, there is an indigenous Colombian poet who wrote this verse. "It is always good to have your feet on your head, says my grandfather, so that your steps are never blind." I remember that while I was hearing you at the beginning. And I wanted to ask you this, Lynne. What is the most difficult thing for us to understand in the West about the ways of living of the indigenous people? What is it that we don't understand?
Well, I think that one of the things that I've learned from the indigenous people of the Amazon through the Pachamama Alliance is that they don't individuate so aggressively the way we do. The ethic that they have is that the highest good is the good of the community. So if the community is healthy, then the individuals are healthy and taken care of within that community. My experience of the way modern world people, Western people live, is that we individuate so much that we almost do it at the expense of the community. So it's a kind of a you or me paradigm rather than a you and me paradigm. I often use those phrases from Buckminster Fuller. And the indigenous people that I work with, the good of the community is the highest good. And then within that, the individual is taken care of. But we individuate often in a way that we think we're in competition with each other a little bit more than is necessary. So that's one thing that I think it's difficult for us to shift. But I think we're seeing that now. I think we're understanding, particularly one of the gifts of global warming and the climate crisis is that a gift of the pandemic also is that we are one biology. We cannot escape that now. The pandemic impacts everybody. It doesn't know the color of your skin. It doesn't know how old you are. It doesn't know how you pray. It doesn't care. It is part of the one biology. Indigenous people have known that and practiced that and lived in that reality forever. And we have not. And I find that to be one of the things that's hardest for us to learn and most important for us to learn from them.